Hi, welcome to the video series on Sea Grant's Integrated Financial Planning Model for Kelp Aquaculture. And this is the final video of this series, and it's going to have to do with trying to assess what happens if things don't go according to plan. Now, the first thing to note here is that the page that we're going to be working on is actually not included in this hyperlinked overview. In order to get to this page, you got to scroll down through the bottom and come to the tab for the worksheet, which is called Scenario Analysis. So what we're going to do here is scroll over and start working on this scenario page. Now, scenario analysis is a wonderful tool that Microsoft Excel provides that'll allow you to understand the financial ramifications of changing inputs into your business model, right? So you want to be able to be prepared. What happens if your price that you can get for your output goes up or goes down? What happens if your interest rate goes up or goes down? Okay, so scenario analysis allows you to see the end result in terms of profitability for events that are outside of your control changing. Okay, scenario analysis is not the place for you to completely change your business model. If you say, well, what happens if I don't do, an integrated model, if I just do kelp aquaculture alone and not a nursery, etc., right? That's not what this is for. This is for assessing the value of things changing that are outside of the model, that are sort of exogenous factors, as we would call them. So unlike what I've done in the rest of these explanatory videos, I want to make sure and refer you to these instructions up here. Okay, conducting scenario analysis is a little bit complicated. There's a lot of steps to it. And the first and most important steps is to save your work, right? So right now we've got a model that is profitable that we were using for the explanation of the financial outputs. So right now we've got this model that's profitable, and we want to save that and then save a new copy under a new name. All right, so let's save this as Kelp model with scenarios 2024. Okay, so that's the most important thing you can do, because what we're going to do during the scenario analysis is we are going to mess with the structure of the model. Right, we're going to have to unprotect some sheets and change how things are calculating. Okay, so very, very important. Save a new copy. Okay, now Excel's scenario analysis tool needs to have all the inputs and the outputs that we're looking at all on one page. And so in consultation with Sea Grant colleagues all over the country, we came up with a number of inputs that could be relevant to doing some what-if analysis on. Notably, your price, obviously, how much you can get for what you're producing, how much kelp you are harvesting per foot over the course of your 3-year model, and then some of the big picture startup costs elements, how much it costs you in terms of capital expenditures, how much it costs you for your major systems for the nursery, how much it costs you for permitting for a kelp farm or for the farm array or for any significant boat, all that kind of stuff, or harvesting gear. Okay, the other cost elements that you could have some vulnerability to, costs that you need to hire people for your nursery operation and for your kelp farm operation. And then in terms of the funding, how you're going to pay for this, what happens to your profitability if interest rates go up or go down? What happens if you're not able to provide as much cash to start with as you thought, or if you're able to provide more and don't need to make all these take all these loans? Okay, and then the outputs that we're interested in are profit, obviously, in the first year, in total, how much cash you end up with after 3 years of doing this, what your total monthly loan payments might be, And then what is the ending value of the equity stake that you've put in this business? And then some of the other outputs that we might be interested in is, how much do you need to sell in order to break even of either of your production? Okay. So that's sort of what we're looking at. We gotta the time consuming aspect of this is getting this model to flow on only one page. Right now, these cells that are grayed out here, these output cells, they are referring to the output pages in the model. So this cell right here, your first year profit, if we look up to what it's referring to, it's picking up your profit in the first year from the pro forma P&L sheet. Okay, and so these output cells are pointing to other cells within the model that are all being driven by your inputs. But as I said, in order for scenario analysis to work, we have to have all the inputs coming from the same sheet as the outputs that we're looking at. So the time-consuming aspect of doing this work is literally changing where we're getting our inputs from. What do I mean by that? Right? I said that our inputs had to come from this page in order to drive the output on the same page. Right? So if we want to change the price of seed string per spool, it needs to come from this page. Everything in the input sheets need to be referring to this page. And so the first thing we need to do is change how we are deriving these important input variables. Now, it's much easier to do this if you make a second window. So go up here to the window menu bar, get a new window, and then you can lay them next to each other. Okay, here we are. I've got the business model page lined up next to my scenario page. And what this is saying is I want to go to business model cell F60 and F62, and I want to replace what's in there currently with a cell reference to the scenario page. So you'll see here that our price of seed string right now is 150 bucks. Okay, so the first thing you want to do, the way that I've got your instructions up here, is I'm suggesting you go into each of these variables that you're considering changing and just plug in the numbers that are already there in your model. Okay, and then go back in afterwards and do a cell reference. So let's go ahead and do that. We're going to say, I see that my price is currently 150 bucks per seed string, per spool of string, and I'm going to be selling 75% of my output at that price. Okay, so I'm picking those up. I'm just visually looking at these numbers and I'm manually entering them in. Now at this point, right, you can continue doing that. So I scroll down, I get my top tier wet kelp price of 90 cents, and I'm selling 90% of my output at that price. And then my second tier bulk kelp price is 70 cents, and I'm spending 10% of my output. And by the way, here's a little error message that reminds you, if you're making changes to these scenarios, you got to remember that everything has to add up to 100%, right? So we're going to put that 10% in here and our error message goes away. Okay, so we can do that. Or if you want it to be, I think it might be a little more efficient. I don't know. It depends on how you work. You could pick up all the numbers for all these values here. So we go to the startup nursery page and look in cell G69. There it is, 2700. Now, you will notice that this is a protected cell. You can't change this. You can't just put this 320 that we see in there. It won't let you. And the reason is because I need for this model to be able to adjust depreciation based on the total of the capital expenditures, and so you're going to see some differences between what's calculated in these cells and what's in there now, and that's just an unfortunate reality. I can't do that any other way that I can think of. Okay, so you can do that, right? You can go from the top down and just pick up all of these numbers as they exist, and then go back in afterwards. So the next thing you need to do, right, step 2, is to go back to the original input sheets and replace the numeric values of those variables with cell references to the same values on the scenario sheet. What do I mean by that? Well, let's go back to this business model page. And up there, where I've got my price per spool set at $150, I have to go in to this $150 cell in our business model page and hit an equal sign and refer over here to the value in the scenario page. Right, so this is still that 150 here, but now it's a cell reference. And if I change this value here, the price per spool on the scenario page, to 175, right, that 175 shows up over here, flows through the entire model, and changes the profit and other important outputs of this model. Okay, so we're going to have to do that over and over and over again, however many of these variables you think you want to change. Okay, so before I'm going to do that off camera, because nobody wants to see me do data entry, but I do want to note one important thing before I shut this down for a minute. Okay, if we go down to the values here in the startup costs, you're going to need, let's see, we'll go to the startup nursery. Okay, here's that $2,700 value. Now, I said that you need to change this plugged in value with a cell reference over here to the scenario sheet. Okay, but when I go to do that, right, it won't let me because it's a protected worksheet. And this is why I said it was so important to save this with a new file name, because you are messing with the structure of a model, right? You're unprotecting the model in order to be able to do this. Okay, so remember, the way to unprotect the sheet is you go to the Review tab, you say Unprotect Sheet, you are asked for a password, it's 1234, there it is, and now the padlock goes away down here, and we can go ahead and use a cell reference to pick up the total upfront cost for site work and capital expenditures. Okay. Now make sure that you also change the depreciation value, even though it is calculating over here and we can't change anything on the scenarios sheet. We still need that value to flow through from our inputs as we change our assumptions. So watch, right now we've got an accumulated depreciation or an associated depreciation value calculated at 324. If I change this, if I say, you know what, I'm going to spend a lot of money, I'm going to spend $7,500 here. Okay, that's also going to change the depreciation value here in this cell, which flows through to our financial outputs. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and pause the video for a bit and get all this filled out, and then we'll come back and talk about how to actually conduct scenario analysis. Okay, I'm back after filling in all these cell references. And I did, before we continue on with actually conducting scenario analysis, I wanted to show you one thing that you need to be careful about. Now, in our model here, we are not planning on getting a purchasing a new boat or any other significant equipment for it in this model, right? And so I've got nothing here in this data entry table on the startup farm page, and nothing here in the scenario pages. So let's say one of the things that I'm thinking about is what happens if I buy a boat? Does it make a difference? Right? You can't use this scenario page to do that. You have to enter, if you want to mess around with buying a boat or not buying a boat, you got to do it over here initially. Why? Let me show you what happens. Let's say, right, I've got a cell reference here to this cell over here, farm equipment. And right now that value is 0. Okay. Once I put in a cell reference for depreciation, and put that pointing over here to an empty cell for depreciation, it's not good. I get error messages in here in my profit. Okay, so and the reason for that is because the way that this calculation goes, it is now trying to divide by 0. Okay, and you can't divide by 0. It gives you an error. So if you want to have additional inputs here that you don't have anything in already, you have to put something into these cells. The 0 that it's dividing by the way, is life expectancy. Once you put something in this life expectancy column, the error goes away, even though there's still nothing there. Okay, so that's why it's trying to divide by the years that it's going to live. Okay, for the depreciation. So if you have, all right, so let's go ahead and do this now. So let's say now I'm going to buy a $10,000 boat. Right, it flows through over here, it calculates my depreciation, and it doesn't give me that error message because I have a value here in the life expectancy column. So that's just something technical to watch out for. Okay, so we're finally ready. We can now conduct scenario analysis. All right, so if you remember, our sensitivity analysis looked at the results of changing no more than 2 input variables on a specific output number. For instance, this table here looks at first pre-tax profit if you change cost per pound, your variable cost per pound of kelp, and your variable cost per foot of seed, and how that changes your profit. Well, what about if you're interested in more than that? Okay, that's where scenario analysis comes in. So if we go back to the scenario page, okay, and go to the data tab, which I have open already, and you go what if analysis scenario manager. Okay, now I've already created 3 scenarios for you, just so that you can see how the output looks before we go about creating some new ones. If I select summary here, it's asking me which cells I want to see as outputs, and if I select first year profit, total 3-year profit, and ending cash, right? So remember, those sensitivity tables could only look at one output at a time when you're changing inputs. Now we're changing inputs, and we can look at the input effect on multiple outputs. And as a matter of fact, if I wanted to pick up also my ending equity value, my ending net worth, without picking up the loan payments, I can go ahead and do that too. Okay. Hit OK here. And that generates a new worksheet in this book that throws those values that we defined as a base case, which is where we started, 90 and 70 for our tier 1 and our tier 2 kelp prices, a best case with prices going up, and a worst case with prices going down, and how that affects first year profit, 3-year total profit, the ending cash position, and the ending equity value of this business. Right, so that's the sort of end state of a very simple scenario analysis. Okay, let's go back over to the scenario page then and make some more complex scenarios. Okay, so let's see. So we go, what if analysis, scenario manager. Okay, right now I've got these 3 scenarios already defined. How about if I add another scenario and we can change some additional inputs? So let's say we want to look at the potential for an inflationary environment. Okay, how do increasing prices occurring at the same time as increasing input costs and increasing interest rates, how do those affect my profitability? Okay, so we're going to call this inflation. Okay, and our changing cells now, we can just get rid of these, right? So I guess actually we can keep those. So our kelp prices are going up, and then you use the command click to select non-adjacent cells. So let's say that our array becomes more expensive and our labor cost for the farm becomes more expensive, and then interest rates go up. And my computer wants to call me Miss Smarty Pants, and I cannot figure out how to get it to go away, so we'll just hit delete there. All right, so this is inflation. So my bulk kelp price, so the money that I'm getting from my kelp maybe goes up to $1.10. And my tier 2 bulk kelp price goes up to 85 cents a pound. The total cost for my farm array goes up to $25,000. The labor rate for my farm goes up to $35 an hour. And the interest rate on my commercial loan, my primary loan, goes up to 8%. Right? So all of these values are going to go up across the board. Okay. Let's go ahead and hit OK here. And I'm going to look at the summary for inflation. Let's see how that works. The results cells can stay the same, except you know what? Let's pick up our monthly loan payment too. So we can just grab all of these. All right, and so here is our scenario summary for an inflationary environment. Now notice that these other scenarios remained. If we didn't want to see all of them in one sheet, you would have to remove those scenarios from your list, right? But here in our inflationary environment, relative to the current values of the base case, our first year profit increased. Our total 3-year profit, however, decreased a little bit. We have more cash at the end. Our loan payment went up by quite a bit. And the total value of the equity relative to our base case went down a little bit. So that's how scenario analysis works. You can make any fantasy world that you want, and this can just keep going and going. If it gets to be too much, you can get rid of some of these other scenarios that you defined, so that you don't have an endless worksheet. So I hope that this series of videos has been useful for you, and it's been a delight working on this project.